There we go.
All
right, well, thank you, everyone. It's Wednesday, January 8th, 2014, and this is the Tri-Town meeting, typically a monthly meeting between the Neshoba Regional School District, school committee members, and the Board of Selectmen and Finance and Advisory Committee members of the three towns. Maybe before we get started, if Nan had asked to get everyone's name, so we can just go around the room and introduce ourselves and who we are. That'd be great. I'll start. I'm Stan Wysocki. I'm Chairman of the Board of Selectmen of the Town of Bolton.
Larry Delaney, Bolton Selectman.
I'm Mark Sprague, Bolton Selectman.
I'm Stan Starr, Lancaster Selectman.
Don Lowe, Bolton Town Administrator.
Michael Wood, Superintendent of Schools.
Nancy Fetterspiel, School Committee Chair.
Lorraine Ramasco, School Committee Member for Bolton.
George King, Assistant Superintendent of Schools.
Jim Southey, Selectman from Stow.
Ross Perry, Stow Capital Planning.
Bob Sikansky, Bolton Finance Committee.
Right. Thanks, everybody. Before we get through on the agenda, the items, any town updates from the last Tri-Town. I think it's been a fairly quiet month in between the last one we had in December and now. There's not much going on in Bolton other than gearing up and meeting with the various departments, and starting to go through their budgets, which is a process that'll continue through the March timeframe at least. And Don, I don't know if you have any comments on how that process is going so far.
The process is going well. We've assembled all the warrant articles. All the budgets have been submitted. I'm in the process of packaging the warrant now and try to get like items together. We have received the capital request from the school district, from Bill Cleary. I would say the direction I've gone in for now is any capital request I've got as a placeholder as its own article, which doesn't imply that ultimately it will be on the warrant. It's just a way that we're going to track everything now. It doesn't imply that we're going to borrow or whatever. Just it's a good way to track it, and I'm sure we'll pull some off. Right now we've got, I think, about a half a dozen planning bylaw changes coming up. The most prominent ones of which are the proposed medical marijuana bylaw. We've got the acceptance of 3 roads up at the Northwoods development. We've got the potential of the village overlay district coming on, potential of an aquifer overlay, and one I think that, and some modifications to the barn bylaw. So that's 5 anyway. So nothing enormous right now. I think the biggest ticket items for us will be whether or not we go forward with the purchase of a new fire apparatus for about $580,000, a new ambulance for about $250,000, although we'll be able to cover a fair portion of that, if not all of it, out of our ambulance receipts funds. And I think those are the 2 big ones for now, and nothing at this point that appears to be overly controversial, but the citizens' petitions aren't in yet, so you never know.
Stan?
It has been very quiet in Lancaster to have it.
Thank you.
Nothing else to report.
Okay, Jim?
It's been quiet in Stow, maybe not quite that quiet, but I guess 3 things. We're also in the middle of our budget process with the town administrator meeting with department heads and going over their budgets and trying to hammer that down. We continue to wrestle with the 3 local capital projects that we have been wrestling with for over a year and a half now at this point. I could bore you with details there, but essentially it's a struggle to figure out how we can drive those costs down from the figures that lost at town meeting at the polls a little bit over a year ago, and also taking into account the fact that we have a large 36,000 square foot empty building, former Pavo Elementary School. I think the taxpayers are understandably expecting us not to be building a lot of new buildings before making some suitable use of all of that.
Yeah.
But renovating 36,000 square feet turns out to be extremely expensive. And in non-financial news, we do have two large affordable housing developments that are moving along very well. The Pilot Grove 2, the first expansion of our Pilot Grove development is actually under construction right now. And I think they are working even in this weather.
Wow.
Yeah, and it seems to be going along very well. There is another development of, I forget exactly what they call it, but at the Plantation Apartments, it's not assisted living, but it's a step down from that. That has not been, that is still in litigation. But the developers won in Superior Court, is now on appeal to the appeals court, which fortunately for them is a cheaper and quicker timeline than the trial court was. Those are our major goals.
If I can just add from capital planning and Stow, we've got requests so far this year of $642,000 for capital projects. That doesn't mean they're going to be approved or come forward, but that's been requested. And Michael, if the school would like something, we would appreciate some numbers.
Yep, I was doing that. Yeah, I did too, so I'll follow on that.
Okay, so based upon what we have and what we might get, I'm thinking we're between $640,000 and $890,000 in capital project requests this year.
Are you folks considering doing all three capital projects?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the three capital projects are a new fire station, a new community center and/or council on aging center, and a new library. And when I say new, I really mean probably renovations potentially. And the question is, where do we put all these things? Do we have a new fire station at the site of the present station? Town meeting is, we are attempting to purchase a parcel of land right in our upper village that could be a suitable site for the fire station. The library and the council on aging, we're considering locating them at Papa. Right now, we've priced that out. It is more expensive than we had hoped. And of course, there's some sympathetic. Some people want to stay at the Randall location for our library, which if you've ever seen the building, I think you understand why. So we continue to wrestle with that. We have an oversight committee made up of most of the selectmen and representatives from the three building committees trying to coordinate all these projects. There is a timeline under which we present a new proposal to the spring town meeting. At this point, it's starting to look to me, just speaking to myself, like an ambitious timeline. And I think we'd all rather get it right than have it go forward prematurely.
Yeah. Michael, anything from the district in general?
We're in the same process as the town, in that all of our department budgets are in. We've compiled it. We have a meeting with the departments on Monday to try to finalize things, and it goes before the school committee on the 28th.
Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. All right, let's get to the agenda items that were submitted for this meeting. The first one being communication between the school committee, the district management, and the towns of Bolton, Lancaster, and Stow. And we've sort of talked about this at previous tri-town meetings, and you know, the various select boards and advisory/finance committees have sort of chatted amongst themselves, and I've had conversations with them as well as these gentlemen, and there just seems to be a problem in what information is being communicated, you know, or how it's being communicated, and perhaps when it's being communicated. You know, I think, you know, more recently, you know, I think all three towns were a little taken aback on the science renovation coming on the heels of the you know, the turf field renovation project. And I know that you know, we met with with you folks, and I know the Stow selectmen met with you, and the Lancaster selectmen met with you, and there were some news articles that were written, the words blindsided, sort of came up. I'm not saying that anybody's doing anything wrong, but there just seems to have been, over the years, this feeling that there's, if nothing else, a lack of timeliness in terms of some information that's being disseminated. And I know that, some of the responses have been, you do have information posted on the website, and you do have school committee meeting minutes, and there are the recordings of the school committee. But I think one of the Stowe selectmen in one of the articles had indicated that it really shouldn't be us having to delve through school committee meeting minutes and going through 2 or 3 hours of school committee video recordings to find this kind of information out. Because there is a lot of minutia that's in those things that really isn't applicable. As a matter of fact, I actually went and printed all of the school committee meeting minutes from 2013 and sort of went back and looked. And, in some cases, there really isn't either the depth of the kind of information that the 3 towns are looking for, or perhaps lack of detail on some things. I think going back, the budget cycle of this year, I mean, there really wasn't much in the minutes to indicate what was going on in terms of the budget. So, one group may think they're communicating and providing everything that we need. Some of us feel that we're not getting what we need when we need it. And obviously, this forum was designed to provide that kind of exchange of information. So I think especially at the last Tri-Town meeting, after that meeting had concluded, since the selectmen were posted and our advisory committee were posted, we sort of had a side conversation, just sort of discussing that, some of the things that had come up. And we felt strongly to bring this, and see what we could do to try to, I'm not saying fix, but figure out a way that the towns get the kind of information that they need when they need it, potentially, in advance, and maybe a little bit more as things progress, getting that, updates on various projects, whether it be, the science lab project at the turf field or the concession stand. We were a little surprised at the cost overruns. We had heard from you, Nancy, when you came to our selectmen's meeting back in December, that you were about 70 or so thousand over. You find out the Tri-Town is about $140,000 over. But I think, in fact, in the June 18th school committee meeting minutes indicated that you were already $150,000 over budget, and you needed to figure out a way to finance the rest of that. And I didn't see in the minutes where you were planning on pulling that money from, and we had that discussion about how we do it in Bolton. So, I think we're here to try to kick around some ideas and maybe figure out how, we can foster a little bit better communication so that, we're all kept informed on both sides. I mean, obviously, we owe you information. Obviously, if things are coming up relative to issues in our budget, we have to inform you of that, especially when you're trying to prepare the budgets and assessments that you're going to be presenting to the town. So I open it up to discussion, and anybody can jump in or not.
I just feel, I think communication is always something that has to be worked on and massaged. So I appreciate your openness about the issues that you feel that exist. I again have to say for the record, on the science lab project, that was a grant that came out of nowhere for all of us, and you knew as soon as we did that we were applying for it. So I really don't want to use that as the basis for your feeling of this.
No, I just use it as that's an example.
I understand, but I just want to clarify for the public that from the get-go, from when we knew for it, when we applied for it, all public open meetings, you knew it came in January, and we flew with it in January, and we knew that everybody was, that the timeline was tight. We knew that from the get-go. It's just, I don't think that's a good example of what you're trying to get at. The other examples I have no problem with. I really think the public needs to understand there just was no underhanded or miscommunication on that, on our part whatsoever. we were beholden to the state and the grant process.
And quite honestly, if we had known when we started talking about the track that this opportunity for the science labs was coming about, was a possibility, I personally would have been very willing to push off the track stuff so we could figure out the whole thing together. But when we talked about the track and when we started with the track, we didn't know that science lab thing was even a possibility. And when we started talking, quite honestly, I was floored by the estimate of how much it turned out to be in terms of the scope of the project, because we originally were led to believe that windows and roofs and stuff like that were not part of the project, in which case we would have been talking about a much smaller project. So, you know, yes, I appreciate that you're frustrated by that, but quite honestly, we were too. And, you know, I would represent Stow differently had I known everything from the get-go, but I didn't. Just as Michael didn't, because the grant didn't exist when we started talking about the track.
So if we take the, I mean, can we just agree to take the science lab off the table? It is a place where, I mean, it is a place where, I mean, it came up late. I wasn't on, I don't know how quickly it was communicated. You know, it may have been very prompt, but it did come out, you know, the timing was unfortunate from a, but I think the other examples, I think, I mean, the last Tri-Town meeting, I guess the discussion of the snowplow, you know, I mean, a bunch of things like that, you know, where there hasn't been communication. You know, and I think those are the things that we want to be focusing on, and how do we improve that? How do we get, you know, and I think, you know, Nancy, when you introduced yourself, you start off by saying you're the Bolton representative.
I actually didn't say that, I said I was chair.
Or you said you're a Bolton representative. And I think, you know, that's an important thing to make sure that you know, we all understand that, you know, that who you're representing, and, you know, who, you know, you're kind of serving several different masters here, so you need to make sure that you keep all of them happy. I mean, quite honestly, I mean, that's really what a lot of what it comes down to.
I don't want to beat the science week to death, but I will say that at least Stow's capital planning, we ask all of our departments, including the schools, give us a 5-year forecast. Not only what you need for this year, but a 5-year forecast. And part of the purpose of that, so you get some visibility and things don't come out of the blue. So if the school needs a new science wing, I kind of thought it would have shown up on a 5-year plan. Maybe the financing of it that year makes sense because the grant pops up. I can appreciate that. But a 5-year plan would help us know what's going to happen. Now, maybe in defense of the school, which I don't want to be quoted as doing,
So leave the room, man.
Michael has convened a space needs task force for the high school, which I see as a way of saying the school has a project, it's coming, we don't have definition of it yet, but towns, be aware there's a project coming, which I think is exactly what I've been asking for, is don't pull these things out of the blue and surprise us, let us know they're coming. And I have a feeling this is what he's doing. He's calling a bluff and letting us know he's got a project.
That is exactly right. He's calling our bluff, and good for him. And if we all don't participate, shame on us. But I just want to say, I think Stan raises an extremely valid point, and I think he raises it in a really good way. I mean, from the school's perspective, what happened with the science building, to a smaller extent what even happened with the turf project, is just not productive. Because in both projects, a large part of the discussion got off of the merits of the project and onto the process of who knew what when. And that kind of discussion is never good. And I'm reminded of something that happens to me all the time, and I bet that it happens to a school superintendent every single day, which is somebody says, do you know about blah, blah, blah? And I say, what are you talking about? I don't think you ever told me about this. Oh yeah, I sent you an email. And you know they did send you an email. They sent you an email maybe 2 weeks ago, and it's among the 150 emails you get. so it's true, it's absolutely correct. You were indeed informed. But did you have a realistic chance to understand the magnitude of it? Well, no. I mean, you can't say anybody did anything wrong, but the fact is that the communication didn't occur. It's almost like looking at black and white television. Yeah, okay, it's accurate, but a big part of it is missing. I think Stan raises a really good issue. I think your task force is a good answer to big things like renovations to the high school. Then there are going to be smaller things like the science labs. The other thing, I mean, you did mention them at this forum, Tri-Town, but for whatever reason, the magnitude certainly never got through. I know it sounded like not that big for a project, sort of like what Maria was saying. It didn't sound that big. And that's a problem for all of us. And I think that's what he's raising.
Bob?
Well, I too have issues with communication here, but I have to say, again, in the school district's defense, that at a tri-town meeting in the spring, Michael Wood was asked, do you have any other capital projects coming up? And he said, yeah, we're going to be coming to you with science labs in the fall. Now, I don't remember who among us, other than I, was at that meeting. And it was a short answer to, yes, Mr. Wood. I'm glad you remember it. You know, sometimes I have these dreams. No. But, you know, in this, so it was a short answer. There was no follow-up questions to it, nothing about the magnitude of it, but there was clearly, it set my expectations that after town meeting, we were going to be having another meeting in the fall to look at another capital project. So it was brought up, and again, I don't remember the, you know, who else was there or what other issues were on the table that particular tri-town. But you know, it wasn't done in secret.
No one's saying it was done in secret.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's even suggesting that, and I agree with you. But I think, again, the magnitude, the color, the flavor, the potential impact, the timing of the impact, none of that got through. Why it didn't get through? I don't really care. I don't really care whose fault it was. And maybe it was nobody's fault. But in the three towns, none of that information got through. So I think what Stan is opening the door to is maybe some sort of an understanding and you know, going forward that I'm just going to throw out projects over a certain magnitude. We really gotta say, all right, everybody, this could hit at any time between this date and this date. And identify, it may be project over 5 million. I forget now what the science labs were. I want to say 10.
I think it was close to 8. Something 8.
But quite honestly, I expected it to be about 3.
Okay.
I agree with it.
Well, and you know, you raise a different point, which is we just didn't know. Okay, fine.
Well, Jim, I would lower the number. I mean, Stow's trigger point for capital projects is 10 grand in 3 years of life. So I would say if the Stow's assessment is going to be more than 10 grand, we'd like to know. It's part of the 5-year capital plan, you know. So that would include anything that falls under that definition. And that's a 5-year plan rolling forward that says, you know, a roof on the building this year, windows on the building the following year, things that Bill has been working with us and pretty compliant on providing.
Which we do have. I think there are a couple of things at play here in terms of relative to the high school. Our capital planning for our high school is part of a rolling plan. We've had one for almost 8 years now. And we review that as part of our budget process. The nature of that is that, you know, it's relative to the high school, so it's part of our operational budget. So it's handled differently than the way towns have to deal with capital projects and things, items that have to go onto the warrant. So frankly, we handle them differently and see them slightly differently, but they are part of that scheduled maintenance plan, which is our definition of capital, which we follow the same as all the towns do. So that's part of the piece of the communication issue. So But again, we review that part of the budget process, we make that very public. It is a rolling plan, all of the items above $10,000 are part of that. There were items, for example, you know, again, because it was a grant, we have never, we had not prior to the grant opportunity, we had not identified in a way that the grant allowed us to identify that kind of project. We identified many of the items that were part of that, and they're still there because we didn't do it as part of that. So, you know, they were there, but we never put them all together to make it a project.
The roof and the windows.
The roof and the windows and so forth, the gas lines and so forth, the water lines. So that's how it grew, frankly, exponentially in terms of its size. And you know, that's how that is. But all of our capital items are part of that scheduled maintenance, and it's very much a part of our. And I believe Bill and Bill before him have always made that a part of their conversations with the capital groups in each of the communities. And if that hasn't been happening, we'll certainly make sure it starts or gets revived.
Yeah, I mean, both bills have been good at that. We haven't heard this year, but I assume it's all coming. So maybe I should, instead of saying the trigger point for notifying the towns is not 10 grand, it's whenever there's going to be a special charge. I mean, if you're handling it in your operating budget, that's between you and the school committee and the towns when you bring your operating budget forward. But if it's something that's going to be separately bonded or whatnot.
Exactly, and that's the way we've handled it.
I think those are the ones that,
So
as much advance notice as possible so that it you know, the Stow selectmen are working really hard trying to schedule these 3 municipal projects. It throws it out of sync if all of a sudden the school comes up with a project we hadn't seen coming.
So in these meetings, we're pretty good at assessing what the operational budget is and talking about that in detail. And then we're pretty good at talking about the capital projects that don't have any contingencies other than will the towns fund them. What you really identified is another class of projects that have contingencies that are up to people not in this room. People giving grants.
Right, exactly.
People, I don't know what else might be in that class.
Right.
And what you're basically saying is that for stuff like that, those grants could be awarded at almost any time. And the manner in which they're awarded might combine certain things and have certain contingencies associated with them of co-funding. Maybe we need to devote some time specifically to that class of stuff and try to get a better grip on it. But then I also think that we all have to understand, the school committee has to understand, that if the timeline for town action and town appropriation is going to be really short, like between January and May, that's going to be a big problem.
Right, and beholden to these other funders,
Right.
that they create that problem.
Right.
And we've had those conversations. For example, this is the Massachusetts School Building Authority. The Superintendent's Association had that very conversation with them about the science grants, for example, because we were all in the same boat. If you read headlines of other communities who were in the same boat, you weren't alone in being sort of caught off guard with the timeline. You just had town meeting. You were back at town meeting trying to have another vote on something. And MSBA basically said, as some state agencies can find themselves saying, tough, it's our time. If you want the money, deal with it. Exactly. If you want the money bad enough and they control it, they can do that. They were under some constraints too, because the money came from excess points off of bonds that they had.
And they need to move it.
And they had to move it. So, once that was explained to us, it makes sense. So, they're not the bad guys either. It's just the way it is. And if everybody galvanizes around the idea of the project, it goes forward. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And some pass and some do.
Is there any way of having a meeting or a session at one of these meetings to just talk about grant applications you have pending before the MSBA, that there can't be an infinite number of them?
No, we don't have any. We're skipping this year's cycle, for example, because we have nothing, and we don't want to get into the queue too soon and so forth. So
Are there any other of these sort of contingent?
I don't know of any on the horizon, and I don't know of any projects that we have on the horizon that will be pulled together to make something like that.
And if I can just throw in, the school committee discussed long and hard over several meetings and other places about whether or not we should have gone for that science lab grant. Because we knew we couldn't please everybody. So if we decided not to go for it, we were turning down $4 million to help us build new science labs. And there'd be a lot of people in the communities who said, "What? You're being irresponsible. We had an opportunity for $4 million and you said no thank you? Are you crazy?" We could hear that. People said that. And then on the other hand, we had the wrath of people who said, "What? You're gonna ask for this kind of money with such short notice?" And we decided it was responsible of us not to make that decision for the towns, but to bring it forth to town meeting and let people vote on it. You know, I don't know, maybe we didn't make the right decision, but as a group, that's what we decided to do. And, you know, maybe now, learning the reaction that we got, maybe next time we won't do that. But I can tell you that if the opportunity were to come up again, I'd be hard pressed to say no thank you without checking with folks.
I think one process that, excuse me, that we have in place now that works on probably less major issues is, I think there's pretty good communication between Michael and the 3 town administrators on more operational type things. You know, he'll throw some questions out to us or ask for some input or whatever, and we do the same, and I think we all communicate. I think we all get back to each other probably within 48 hours, generally speaking. Maybe we can expand that to some larger real-time things as they come up. So you can, I mean, we are, the 4 of us are the senior management team, so then we're each responsible to get real-time information back to our selectmen and our capital planning committees and our finance committees and so forth. And maybe, and I'm not an advocate of, definitely not an advocate for the meeting for the sake of meeting, but there probably should be times that the 4 of us are in a room together, just going over some issues, you know, working both ways, and we can get into some details that really aren't meant for a broader meeting like this, and maybe that's another way that we can have the flow of information expand. And I think we'd all be up for that.
Yeah, to your point, Nancy, about we've had a lot of internal discussions about what to do and this and that and the other thing. And maybe getting a heads up from you on that process before you have finalized, okay, we need to bring it to the town, and that's when we find out, and maybe backing it up a bit and letting, you know, Don know so he can let us know that there's this discussion, so at least it prepares us.
I think the discussion was aware, I mean, I think that boards were made aware of the opportunity that the grant came up. I don't know if, you know, maybe we should have made more of an effort to invite you in on the discussions.
I mean, to Bob's point, I do recall in the fall prior to when all this happened, starting in January, I know there was some discussion about science lab renovation. And to Jim's point, it was the magnitude of that was not known. You know, we talking about 800,000 or we talking about 8 million. It turned out that we're talking about 8 million. There's a big difference between that. And I think from that point of, oh, we need to renovate the science labs, there wasn't much discussion about that and how that process was going along. And even after we applied for the grant, understanding what the potential magnitude of that was until sort of at the very end of that process, which occurred mostly like right after the annual town meeting where we had just approved, you know, the $2 whatever million for the turf field. So it's that kind of, you know, holy mackerel, you know, maybe we should have had a discussion, a combined discussion. I think that came up in your discussions before, you know, as the science project would come in with Stow. Maybe we should have had a little more awareness of that magnitude as we were discussing one, as opposed to treating them as the turf field and science lab renovation, as opposed to looking at them as a, you know, we now have to spend maybe 10-point-something million, you know, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I think, your point, Nancy, that you feel like you want to apply for grants, absolutely. You're going to be taken to task if you don't. But,
Lose-lose.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
But saying, okay, folks, we applied for a grant, there's 2 elements missing from that. And one is, and if we get it, it's going to require a contribution of $8 million. Because to some of us fools, we think that we assume grant means free money. And these MSBA grants actually mean you have to kick in a substantial amount. We need to be reminded of that. And the other aspect is, and it could hit next fiscal year. So those are the two things I think we're missing from that dialogue.
Yes, I mean, again, brings us back to where we started, that we
Right.
just didn't know.
I know, well
And,
then that's another.
You know, and so in retrospect, and if it happens again, maybe the message is, if you don't know, then don't go for it. Which, you know, I think is kind of unfortunate, but if that's the way everybody feels, then.
I think you're mischaracterizing what we're saying. And we're not saying, oh, we don't know what it's gonna be, so just, you know, pack up our toys and go home. I mean, it's much more I mean, at some point along the process, you were starting to put estimates together, knowing what it was gonna be costing, and no? Never?
Quite
No?
Well, not
honestly,
until-
we-
Never ever until everything came back?
I'll tell
Yeah.
you, my perspective was, I went to that meeting where we toured the science labs in June. And so I had thought, oh, this is gonna be, I went into that thinking it was gonna be, about a $2 million project, and so we're gonna have to ask for about $1 million. I came out of it saying, well, I guess there's a bit more, I bet it'd be more like $3 million, so we'll have to ask for $1.5 million. Then they went away for the summer and they did their studies and blah, 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 blah. We came back in the fall, you know, end of August, beginning of September, whenever they presented the I guess it was the end of August.
I think it was
when they
August,
presented
yeah.
that, and it's $8 million, and they're talking about windows and this and that and knocking down walls and everything else, and quite honestly, I was like, you know, where did that $3 million become $8 million?
So is that?
And so what, you know, it really was. We weren't part of the design discussions over the summer. I mean, Michael was probably in contact with them, but as a school committee, since we don't meet during the summer, we weren't getting.
Do the design meetings occur before or after the grant comes in?
Well, if we had to have a vote in June to say that we were going to essentially, we had two votes. We had one in January where we submitted the grant, and then we found out in mid-May that they were going to work with us. So we had to have a vote on whether or not we were then going to work with them, which was our June vote. And so once we did that, then they set out the parameters of the grant. And actually, they unpacked those and added things, requirements, as the summer went on. So for example, originally, there were things that we didn't think we were going to be able to do because the grant was so limiting. They actually added some things on because they said, if you don't do them, we won't actually go through with the grant. So it was an evolving process until we got to a final number with, you know, the architects.
And you knew that final number in January, I think you said?
No, well, because we had to be ready for the special town meeting. So we found out in late September. I think we had mid-September when we were.
Late summer, early fall.
Yeah.
So, and I just want to try to understand this. When you apply for the grant in January, you don't attach a dollar figure to it?
No, you describe what you see as the needs of the building, and they respond to see if those elements meet the criteria of what the grant's for. We never talk numbers until we had to submit based on the evolution through the summer, we had to submit something, we had a deadline mid-September, and they came back and said they would go up to a certain amount or down to a certain amount. That's how the number gets resolved.
And that's the first time dollars are?
Yep, in that process.
Yeah, I think this is unlike anything we go through in town.
Right.
And correct me if I misexplain this, but this is my perception, is that once you apply for the grant, MSBA assigns a project manager to you, which is now you're incurring costs, but MSBA is selecting who your project manager is. They also select the architects, not the school district, but MSBA selects the architects. And they turn around and they internalize into whatever issue you're trying to solve all the other requirements that MSBA says they have to address. Then they come back with a number to the school of how much this is going to cost. in the end, you can only put that out to bid, if I have this correctly. If you accept it, you can only put it out to bid to MSBA-approved contractors.
Yes.
So, once you buy into the grant process, you have given up almost all control of the project, except for stop-go.
And then they only give you about 2 months to decide whether or not you're going to appropriate the money?
In this particular
This-
process, because they had to have all of their money expended on paper, on their financials by December 31st or something like that. So they had an important meeting. Our overall target was a December meeting where they were going to approve all their projects up and down. And they ran into problems. Schools were dropping out because we couldn't meet, schools had a hard time meeting the deadlines. I don't want to get bogged down with it.
No, we said that this topic
Yeah.
wasn't going to be the topic.
Right.
But that was helpful.
Right. But Bob, explained it fairly well. I mean, there are some pieces there, but, that, it's a partnership, but it's a controlling partnership.
Yeah, you're a minority partner.
Yeah, we're.
Bert?
Yeah, something that's just struck me in this whole, the process of communication in what you just said, almost as an aside, that if there is an $800,000 or an $8 million or an $80 million grant which goes out in June, then the school committee doesn't meet all summer. Was input coming in during the summer and having the school committee meet during the summer and communicating these things back to the town have helped the communication? Because this whole issue is about not so much the science lab, but about how do you communicate between the school committee and the schools and the town boards. And if the school committee has this thing out there and they take the entire summer off, that says to me, that hurts the communication, I think.
There were no numbers until the mid-September piece.
I mean, was it a 3-month black hole?
No.
Between June and
No.
September?
We had a project
June and
manager.
August.
Right, there was a project manager in charge of the project,
And could he have communicated? I mean, it's a because the question is not so much this particular project, but it is a communications issue. And if special town meetings occur in October, telling you in September, no matter what the project is, without, having this space from June when you stop to September when you start up again, with no communication coming through, makes it really, really tough on any town to get ready to make a vote or a decision in October.
the communication was about the elements of what was, because we had project meetings weekly. So the communication was about, what was being researched, what was, designs that were being discussed, elements of the grant that kept changing that we had to meet and so forth. But we really didn't start putting dollar figures until that September piece.
But the town's interested in more than just the dollar figures. I mean, it's going to be what does the project consist of, and I'm just saying there seems to be this large gap in communications where that could help when there's a large project in front of people.
Is there, definitive dollar figures come in the design phase, but conceptual dollar figures can come before that. I know we're going through that in Stow, or in our concept design plans. Is there no way, I think Maureen identified what's a large issue, which is we didn't even know the magnitude, or what you're painting here is that we didn't even know the magnitude of the cost. Forget about the actual dollars. There's a big difference between 1 or 2 million and 8 million. So we didn't even know that until September, you're saying. And then, of course, we only get a couple of months to make up our minds. That seems like it's almost designed to fail. Is there?
Might be why it did.
Yeah, right. Is there no way to get a better grip on not the exact dollars, but the magnitude?
But don't you think in this instance, it was a very unique situation?
Very.
Well,
That's what happened.
That's what I was.
I mean,
It's
the early,
tough. It's
frankly,
really
there
hard.
wasn't much conceptual design. There wasn't that phase, because it was such a quick phase that everything was done. So I don't think you'll ever see this happen again. I doubt unless they go out with another grant program. I mean, it really is a one-time thing, and unfortunately, it didn't happen in the way that anybody would like. But I think one of the reasons we felt the money may have been off as much as it was, I don't think any of us really had a grasp of how, frankly, how bad the situation was in our labs and how much disrepair was there. And then once, like Dawn said, once you get into the process, you are a minority partner. They tell you what you can build, what you can't build, what you have to build. They're not going to spend $4 million to do it because they don't find it to be a viable project at $4 million. They say you need more. Well, or less. You know, in this case, windows, roofs, I guess that makes sense. You would renovate your entire house with a shaky roof department.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but what's being painted for me is almost the idea, and I understand it, but I don't know if it's right, is that what drove the desire to do the project was not a long-standing plan to revamp the science lab. It was the availability of money. And although on a human level, I totally understand that.
But the knowledge we needed was on the horizon.
But as you said, at that point, you knew you needed it kind of vaguely, I want to say, but you didn't even have concept plans of the order of magnitude.
The grant came out next week for a new elementary school in Stow.
Would we just
wouldn't do
seize
it? We wouldn't do it because we don't need one, okay? But this is something we needed, and that's the difference. I don't think, I think that we pretty efficiently spend our money. Some people may occasionally decide what, not like what we spend it on. But I think we very efficiently, I make that case to the cows get home, that we very efficiently spend our money. In this instance, it was something on the horizon. It was a good deal. It was still a good deal. Maybe because of all this stuff that happened, we missed an opportunity, okay? But it was a good deal, and I think we were trying to be responsible despite, to try to take advantage of it and try to save people money for something that wasn't all right.
Think of the Cash for Clunkers program. How many people bought cars that knew that they were going to be going to need to replace their car in the next 2 to 3 years, that jumped on Cash for Clunkers because it was such a good deal, they could not pass it up. And this is sort of like how this was. At the end of 2008, did these people know that they were going to have this awesome deal, Cash for Clunkers? No, they didn't.
No.
I think what Jim is trying to say is, I think we've known for some time that the science labs would need work. So it wasn't like we weren't thinking about that, and then this grant came up and said, wow, what a great idea, let's renovate the science labs. We knew we had to do that sometime prior to that. And I think what Jim is trying to get at is the potential magnitude of what that might be. Obviously, when you finally got the number of 8 million, that they did all their due diligence, all the nuances and whatnot, but you can, based upon previous history, know that renovate a science lab, of which you had 10 or 11 or whatever, is typically going to be in the range of X to Y dollars per square foot.
But it depends how you renovate it.
Well, I understand, but
But that's the huge difference. The way we made it conceived of renovating it through our normal way we spent capital money at the high school through our budget probably wouldn't have been as extensive as
understood, but the thing is that the potential low end of the magnitude might have been known as opposed to not knowing anything until, and I think that's what Jim is striving at, to have that sort of visibility that there's this capital expense of potentially between X to Y millions of dollars out there that may be occurring in some fiscal year, and then we have some horizon to look at that versus something else that comes up more immediate, like the turf field or something else.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
We're buying a fire truck and those kinds of things.
I'm trying to understand the problem, and I think you may be hearing an assignment of fault where there isn't any, certainly not intended. And what I think is odd about this process, as you've described it, is that maybe the need of the project isn't determined by the availability of money, but the scope of the project is determined by how much money is available.
No, by
the rules that they made us go for.
No, yeah, I know, but the point still is the scope of the project is determined by things out of your control and entities out of your control.
Right.
Whereas what we're really talking about is getting some control earlier over at least the rough magnitude and communicating that. You're making the point, you can't communicate a magnitude you don't know about. Okay, fair enough. I'm trying to understand why you can't understand the magnitude of a thing you're saying is in need. And the reason is, you're saying the magnitude of it is something that we determine at the end, and it's determined by not even us.
In this case.
In
this particular case.
The rules keep changing, so you can't, you're playing by one set of rules and then they're changing the rules while you're already in play. And if you didn't know the rules were going to change, you couldn't anticipate. So if they, when Michael first proposed this, he said, this isn't for a whole building and it's not going to be rebuilding half the school. And yet when they actually, then they started changing the rules and, oh yes, you can do windows. And we did that tour. We talked about how bad the windows were, but that they weren't part of the project. That was our understanding.
But I think Jim is trying to say is that until we had the final number of 8 million, we had no visibility whatsoever that this project could be 800,000, $1 million.
There was no initial scope done.
Right, but you don't need to have a project manager and an architectural firm to come up with a range of costs if you're just sort of ballparking something. I mean, there's got to be some.
You had mentioned earlier that that a lot of the stuff that was on there is still on kind of the list of capital improvements you want to do.
Right.
So you could have, as the architect came in and said, "Oh, we're going to do windows," because okay, let me add that number into my kind of rough estimate, or oh, we're not doing the furnace, so let me go across that line. So you could have, over the course of the summer, as the rules changed and stuff, you could have kind of been scoping. It may have been rough. It may have been okay. We're in the $5 to $10 million range, or the this is looking like it's going to be a $50 million project. Maybe we need to, But I mean, over the course, that scoping could have been done, could have been communicated. I think is the big thing, and with the understanding that this is a range, it's an estimate. The final number will come in September.
Right.
But at least it prepares the schools.
I really do, but I have to tell you, in public policy, it's very difficult to get a number out there and get people's minds to change in a short amount of time afterwards. So, we're talking about a window of 3 months. And if I had put out a number in June that said we're talking about $1 million project, and then I came back in and incrementally, monthly, increased it as we were finding out it was happening.
Well, but I mean, just throw a number out and say, okay, well, this month it's $6 million, and the next one, it's the understand. Well, it may have anyway, but I mean,
it did.
But it did. But going through and I mean,
Would that have been better?
Well,
for every month to get a new number? I don't think so.
Well, it at least sort of let people understand what the process, and it could have been okay. Well, the architects have not, they've now added in, these things, and so we are doing windows, which we weren't before. We're now doing the roof. We're now doing, so there's these incremental things that were added in. It's not just now we're gold plating all the fixtures.
Right.
So
now
and
you
we also
had all that time put in, and it didn't pass anyway. Is that better? I don't know. But I'm just asking that question.
I mean, it's a matter, and people are then going to, have more time to internalize what's going into the project, not so much just saying, here's an $8 million project we want done now.
Can I suggest that we morph this discussion into the task force discussion, which may be your second agenda item, because I think we said we weren't going to meet up.
Right. That's what we're trying to do, yeah.
I actually think that we can fix this in what I think Michael and the school committee started with the task force, in that he's telling us he's got something to be done, he's letting us figure out what the scope is. I'm assuming the end game of the task force is, this is the scope we want to fix, and we think it's X million, and Michael's been very clever at not saying what it is yet, because I think he's still waiting for us to develop that scope. But if we finish this year off to say the scope of the new project is this many rooms and this the science wings, and we think it's a $10 million project, at least now we know there's a need. And if he can get that funded by MSBA and only pay $5 million, great. So in case of Nancy's point, at least you've tried for the grant, don't turn it up. But I want to see a need projected ahead of time. And I think that's happening now in the task force. And that's what we ought to focus on, is how do we make this task force address the problems we've had in the past, so we're not surprised. Nobody should be surprised when the task force comes back and says, this is what we want to build, and it looks like this. We may not like that answer, but we shouldn't be surprised. And that's what I think we're complaining about on the thing we're not talking about anymore.
It's like Voldemort.
The project that shall not be.
Sam?
Yeah, I'm just going to consume my 1 minute of time before I leave here. Who paid, I was curious, who paid for the design cost and architectural cost? What were those costs? And what's the opportunity in the future to get this type of grant again?
So the district paid for all of it. I think the total was 200.
So we reimbursed that.
Yeah, we were reimbursed, but the total was 200,000, and we were reimbursed at 48. Yeah, 48.
So roughly cost of 100,000 thereabouts. And how about opportunistically going down the pike here? Do we have any shot at this in any time near term, or do we know?
Well, they're not annually, but they put out a schedule for invitation for grants. And they do have different types of grants that are available. But they sort of put out annually what those grants will be. So, this year, for example, they just put out that you could do a statement of interest for an entire ad reno build new project. So we don't have a statement of interest in for that. They have smaller projects for emergencies, like a boiler blows up kind of thing. And they do have some roof projects and some window projects that you can do independent. So yes, the answer is yes.
So I suspect the numbers will be a lot tighter next time this happens. I have the suspicion.
But I think the need will be more clear, and a number will be attached to that need, and we'll see how we'll take the approach of the evolution of the project and reporting out those numbers.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else would like to comment, or I think we've... Oh, Baha.
Well, we had a budget adjustment this past summer, right, due to the kindergarten thing. And I know in Bolton, we were originally given an estimate of something like, you're gonna have to pay an additional $250 to $350 to, when we finally get the number. And then the number finally came in at something like 222, if I recall. Mm-hmm. If we had been told it was gonna be between 150 and 2, and the number came in at 222, we'd all be going bonkers at that. And, I can understand why you don't lowball or give low estimates when there's a chance the project's going to go up, because, and it's not just this group of people, it's common to say, I'm being strung along here. And so, I think you're right. You cannot start out saying it's $2 million and then 4 weeks later say, nope, sorry, it's $350, sorry, it's $450. It just comes across as nobody's in control of what's going on. And it's not going to help the project. As much as anybody else has in this room has expressed it, I wish I knew I got information about what was going on and how much it was costing. But I don't think giving out what turns out to be erroneous expectations is helpful.
And as you know, no town administrator wants to be accused of defending the school district either, but but the fact is that there's a big difference between a normal capital project and an MSBA project, and the example that's being used is really the worst possible example, because the district, unlike, or anybody who's managing a project, unlike any other project that you do have control over, you just don't. And there is some problems with continuously revising a number, because you have all the best intentions of doing it, and you're giving the best information you have at the time, and the people closest to you, if it were me, would be the Board of Selectmen, with Michael would be the school committee, would understand why the numbers are evolving. The public at large, who don't understand the nuances, would say, this project's out of control. Nobody's managing this project. And in that particular case, there was somebody managing the project, it just wasn't us. It just wasn't the district. So now that same type of response would be perfectly justified if the school district was in full control of a project, or if any of the towns were in full control of the project, and I'm coming back to the board in August and saying this is gonna cost us $100,000, and then in September it's 250, no, it's 400, I mean, that would be unacceptable. But it's different when you're not in full control of the project. And I am also painfully familiar with the MSBA process because of my involvement with Minuteman.
You know, we've used all the examples with the Science Lab project, which was not the intent. But I think the intent is getting as much information as we possibly can, as soon as we possibly can, and if any information changes, to be able to transmit it. I think that's been some of the frustration that the you know, various finance committees and selectmen have had. It's just, if we can figure out some way to, you know, improve that to some degree, I think that would be very helpful. We have used some bad examples, but I think, you know, I think the intent to try to explain it has been there, so.
Well, two things that I would offer that are already being done, that, you know, I have a school superintendent's report that I do for everybody, but it's for the school committee. I email that now out to parents. So I can put you on our email list and we can email it out to you. And that often has...
It's always on the website, too.
And it's always on the website. You know, that often has all of these kinds of updates on a more... And it goes through all the summer. You know, so that's how that conversation, there was not a stoppage of communication, it just continues that way. You know, that's an easy fix.
I think, though, I mean, I did go through, as a matter of fact, as I said, I've read through all of the minutes for this past year, and I've read through yours. I think, you know, your report is good, but I think it's geared to the parents on sort of like what's happening in the school and those kinds of things. It may not necessarily cover some of the items and information that we might need. So I think, you know, while they are channels, I think it's not necessarily all the appropriate channels in which to communicate, because I did read that and it was like, I think that while it's good, it's targeted to a different audience.
Well, and I appreciate that feedback. I have to say, just so you, I think there are some differences in terms of things that get operationalized, at least to date. You know, once the budget is passed and we operationalize that budget, I don't report to the school committee other than through warrants necessarily items of purchases that we've talked about are going to get purchased. They've directed me to do it, and I do it. So, you know, I know somebody's mentioned the dump truck, for example. I didn't announce that we bought a dump truck. You know,
it was a line item.
Yeah, well, I think that was one individual's, you know.
I know, but
concern.
that's
you
the
know,
example, and maybe I need
right.
to know more about what you want to know about. But you know, it has not been my practice here. It really wasn't my practice in any of my superintendencies to share, you know, operationalize the budget.
No, and I don't think that's not what I think we're asking for. I mean, I think we've looked at the larger items. We did that science renovation, the turf field projects, and the timing of those, the first one and the second one, and other things. I think it's those kinds of issues that have a financial impact to the towns. You know, if you've budgeted a dump truck with a sander body,
right,
then fine, then go buy it. You know, one person had an issue with that, but if that was a capital expense that was budgeted, it's been approved, that's fine. I don't need to know that you bought a dump truck. But I think the issues that impact our budget, large capital projects, status of those kinds of things, issues that might be affecting school rankings and how our schools being perceived vis-a-vis other schools, by, as we talked before, Boston Business Journal, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report. Those are the kinds of things. Just so you know, one of the meetings in December when we had our new town planner, I'd asked Dawn, and we also talked with her when she came to introduce herself, is that one of the issues that we have, and maybe this will be a topic for the next Tri-Town meeting or the one after, is everyone's harping on the tax rate. the tax rate in Bolton is the third largest or whatever it is. And thankfully, there are some other towns, because Boston Business Journal just published something, and there are some towns who have close to $24 per thousand tax rate. And some towns have increased their taxes like 19%, 1.17 or something. But anyway, the town's valuation and home prices have not rebounded as much as we would like here in Bolton. That has a significant impact on the tax rate.
Sure.
In some cases, you can say the tax rate is irrelevant because, you still have to raise the same amount of money if your tax rate is $20 per thousand and your home prices are, X. But if it flips around, your home prices is more, but your tax rate is lower, but you're still being taxed the same amount of money. The real importance is what's the difference year to year. That being said, we've tasked our town planner to look at, other towns similar in nature to ours and why we have not bounced back as much as some other towns. And I think, one aspect is, how is our school district perceived or ranked? And I think that's part of that mix of the perception of valuation. And, we've talked about that, but I mean, our town planner is going to look at all kinds of factors and just see what the mix is and maybe perception. I know most of these rankings rank the high school as opposed to the district, and of course the high school being in Bolton, perception is reality. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the school district, but just letting you know that we're having the town planner look at that, and we may want to chat a little bit about perception of the school district and those kinds of things as part of that.
Well, when I met with, it was about over 25 realtors, is it 2 years ago now? Yeah, because it was about September. Right? So, talked a lot about, what our school system was about and so forth. The feedback that I got immediately was, they're being successful even during these economic times because the school system is drawing them in and drawing in, customers. So I'm looking forward to hearing what she finds out. I think
it's an issue. We need to at least be able to address that. All right. Well, I think we've beaten that topic to death. Let's move on.
Sure we have
Hopefully we
action items out of it, but
we're all going to do better.
okay, great.
And we'll see what happens. The next one is cost sharing for the Neshoba Regional School Resource Officer. When we initially set that program up with the resource officer at the high school, it was decided that the cost would be split evenly between the district and the town of Bolton.
But that was a function of it because it came up so late in the cycle.
It came up so late in the cycle, exactly. And we decided just to move ahead with that. And what we'd like to bring to the table is the potential for the other two towns to participate in that cost sharing so that, our half gets a little bit smaller and Lancaster and Stow pick up a little bit of the pie.
And when the three town administrators discussed it with you last year, Michael, the concept was it would just be another line item in the budget, and the assessment is the assessment, and whatever it is, so everybody carries their portion. So I assume that's what we'll do.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
What's been the reaction so far to the?
It's been very positive. I think we have a great choice and a great backup person. There's been a lot of opportunities for them to be out and about and become part of the school community. I know Dr. Graham is very happy with how it's worked out so far.
Good.
I actually got an update from Chief Alfano that I brought up on my email. If you'd like to hear it.
Sure.
He said, we find it has been very effective having a male and female officer available to both students and staff, as different circumstances can arise where students may respond or relate better to officers of a particular gender. The program has been well received by both students and staff, with the SROs involved regularly in daily school life and activities. Already the value of the officers being readily available to school administrators and in the facility has been demonstrated. Examples would include SROs intercepting a disturbed adult person trying to gain entry to and disrupt the high school, locating school runaways, immediate first responders to on-campus medical emergencies, management of on-campus controlled substance cases, and assistance with school traffic and buses. SROs have also developed a relationship of trust, communication, and mutual assistance with students and staff. Because of this, students and staff are increasingly approaching the SROs for assistance. The officers regularly attend school assemblies and functions and also assist in classes such as the popular Rape and Aggression Defense Course. An added benefit to the town by SROs being on campus is that regularly scheduled patrol officers do not always need to interrupt their normal patrol/traffic enforcement duties by responding to calls for service at the high school, because the SROs can handle lower priority or non-emergency calls. Dr. Graham, the high school principal, is a strong supporter and end user of the program. He and his senior administrators meet and interact daily with the SROs, working together effectively as a team. The program and presence on campus of trained law enforcement personnel has been very popular with parents as well. I have received extensive feedback from parents strongly supporting this program. So it was all good from the chief.
There are 2 officers?
Yes, not at the same time.
Right.
Okay.
They share the position.
And so did the town managers sort of solve the problem by saying it's just to be part of their operational budget and paid through normal town assessments?
That was the discussion we had last year. It seemed to make the most sense, and there was no objection from any of the 3 managers about it.
And the cost, was it 11,000?
Oh, with round figures,
It was
it's...
double.
Half.
So we currently have 11,000 in our budget, so we would put 22.
Right, 22. So it's going to be roughly the same amount split through the assessment.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob?
I think it was 24/7 or something this year.
Okay.
But this is just the wages.
Yes.
So Bolton is still absorbing the full equipment costs, it's still absorbing all the benefit costs.
We're covering the fringe, we're covering equipment and all that. This is
Yeah,
strictly
so I
wages.
just want to make sure this
Right.
isn't, everyone understands that this isn't all the expenses, that we're just.
Right, just the
This
wage
agreement
portion.
just covers the wages.
That's right.
But wages with fringes is what.
No, it's not fringe, just
No,
wages.
just wages.
But that gives us the ability to pull them if there's a bigger emergency.
I mean,
That gives us the ability to pull those officers if there's a bigger emergency in town.
well, it's
If we need
20
to.
hours a week,
Yeah.
and, it's not written in stone which 20 hours they are. So I do think they have a regular schedule of being there, but if something unusual were to occur, I think, first off, the high school would be one of the prime places to make sure is in stable condition. And the second is, I think we can just make up the hours if there's an issue.
And is this resource officer trained to address intrusion and violent Sandy Hook type scenarios?
Yes.
There's a training for school resource officers, and I believe, I know one has, I
But
believe.
they both have,
it,
yes, they
so,
have.
They are armed, if that's what you're asking.
Yes, and they are armed.
Yeah, I didn't want to go down the details, but if
Yeah.
they're trained with that in mind as well as other things, then that's good.
Yeah.
And part of the original design was to not have very regular hours, because obviously you don't want everybody to know when it is that the officer would be there, and that would imply when they were not there.
It's like those light timers that don't always go on. Right? Okay, so, I guess last up is that we've already chatted about it, was the high school space task force, but we talked about it at the previous discussion, but if you wanted to add.
The thing that I think I would like to see come out of the task force, I won't look back, is a need. And to define that need as much as possible. With this, we need this classroom, and we need this addition, and we need this renovation, and we want it for 2015. And then everybody is on notice it's coming, and then you can start trying to get scope, so we know whether it's a $2 million or $20 million project. I'm really concerned about going off and building something because we've got money. MSBA says, here's grant money, we say, oh, how do we spend it? If there's this need out there, I'm really hoping that the task force develops that in that detail, then I wouldn't feel so bad with you saying, hey, the grant just came out, it's 2 months earlier than we expected, but we plan to do it in 2015, we're gonna do it now at the end of 2014. because it's grant money. But you're filling a need versus trying to go out and figure out how to spend money. And that was sort of the impression, was the school was given some money and now it's going to spend it. And oh, by the way, the towns have to fork up $4 million to do that. So if you develop the need ahead of time, at least I'll be debating the project on its merits with you, not on procedural things, which I don't want to get delayed with on procedural things. I'd rather talk merit with you than procedural things.
Just a note on the MSBA for their standard projects, that it's a much more, it's a set amount of money, you know it up front. It's a very competitive process. There are far more districts that are going for it because it's K-12 projects, so it's not just, it's not high school science, it's not a particular subset. So MSBA is far more stringent about doling it out, and they don't have a deadline to spend that money.
On the task force, I think we're looking for an interim report to come out this June, with a final report to come out in June of 2015. Okay, and at that point, it would be a report that the school committee would be asked to consider in terms of recommendations and things like that. In addition to seeing, we have asked for some information on what the current debt schedule is for the high school, because if there are changes that are going to be occurring there, we want to understand that prior to going to the towns. For my part, not only do I want to see needs, because there's lots of needs, but I'd like to know what kind of metrics at the high school are going to change as a result of making changes to the physical plan. If we expand or increase the science labs, what's that going to do? Where do we think that's going to affect the outcomes of students and things like that in terms of SATs and things like that? And we're exploring that. I don't know that we're necessarily going to be able to come back and have metrics like that, but we are, at least at the outset, trying to define the problems in terms of the relative. There's lots of needs, but how do you evaluate the needs?
Right.
How do you rank the needs and things like that? So we're trying to come up with metrics for that.
And just in response, oh, sorry, there's a raised hand.
Well, just one very quick question. Logistically, when is the task force now meeting? Because initially, at least it was meeting the same nights as the Stow Selectmen.
Right, we're on Wednesdays right now, so our next meeting is January 22nd. It's 7 o'clock precisely.
No, it's at your
I mean,
office.
at my office, so I can move it.
At the conference room,
Right,
yeah.
and it'll be on television.
Are they going to stay on Wednesdays here?
Yes,
I think so.
I'm
Yeah.
on advisory, and between the selectmen's meetings on Thursdays and advisories on Tuesdays. Wednesday's my only open night.
It's the full Lindsay.
He wouldn't have said that if he were here.
He's in the planning board right now.
That's funny.
The only thing I was going to add to your point about having the heads up of, I think, and I don't know, it hasn't come up yet, but Bill Perry's been working on a 5-year capital project plan.
Well, we had it last year, it was just
Right.
this issue, we discussed it.
We revised it.
So I just
It
wanted
rolls.
to remind everybody that we have that.
Right.
Right, Robert put it exactly right.
And so that whatever the task force recommends, and if the school committee approves it, then that will have to be incorporated into that
Absolutely.
plan.
That's correct.
I just wanted to be clear that that plan exists.
I missed the beginning of the task force meeting last month, but I guess to expand on a project at the end, I guess my hope is that we will identify sort of the needs, the priorities, and maybe not a project, but say, in this time frame, this is going to have to be addressed, and then farther out this, and farther out that, so that it could be staged or anticipated, but at the same time, if something like the science lab grant were to come up again for whatevers, that we could maybe shuffle priorities, but it wouldn't be a surprise.
But we'd be using that grant money to meet a need that's been
That's been
established
identified.
and defined as much as possible. And that would take off the table the surprise factor. And that, I mean, we all know your plans will never be 100% of what you think they're gonna be. But this would get us in the right direction. We could then say, look, the school's been talking about this thing for 3 years now. And every year they say it's coming closer and getting more important. And I'd be willing to support projects like that because I think that it's something that's been thought through and doesn't appear to be, oh, we got free money, how do we spend it? And I'm not saying that was what it was, but I'm just saying that was the appearance. So I think I really think that this is the right direction, and I'm willing to forgive past errors if the task force moves ahead.
Very magnanimous of you.
Almost like a religious experience.
Go forward in peace, my son.
Anybody else have anything that they want to?
Just one brief issue quickly for the 3 towns. Do any of the 3 towns have the OPEB funding in their budgets contemplated?
We're considering it, yes.
Open.
We're potentially going to add about a $400,000 level as a result of the sale of a cell tower lease, or is that as a lump sum? That's the current thinking.
Yes, I think at the last April, we did create a trust fund, funded it with some reserve fund money. Are you asking, is it's funding in the operational budget? That I'm less clear about. Thank you.
We created the fund last year, but we never put any money in.
Yeah, and I think once we learned that we could use, if we allocate money in 15, some of that could be used for 15 requirements. And so we were going to pursue that. We don't have a dollar figure associated with that yet.
Anything else?
Nope.
I think the next Tri-Town is scheduled for Stow.
Still, yes.
For the date?
February.
First Wednesday?
Sure, first Wednesday in February.
Yeah, this 4th is advisory.
Yeah.
It's a Tuesday.
Oh, so it's February 5th. February 5th.
Okay. Thank you much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good meeting. Stay warm.
Yes.
Go.